For most of human existence, we've lived in a world of scarcity and ever-present danger. And so that mechanism for processing pleasure and pain, that pleasure-pain balance, which I talk about, is what keeps us seeking out new and novel pleasures, never satisfied with what we have, always wanting more. So you can imagine that in that kind of environment, people who are genetically predisposed for what we today call addiction are actually going to be the most valuable members of our tribe, right? Because they're willing to walk further and work harder to get
Searching
those
behavior.
Right, exactly. But today, it's kind of a liability because we don't, swipe right, swipe left, you're done.
Welcome to This Helps with Marlon Morgan, where we sit down with the world's leading helpers to find out exactly what they're doing to help and what helps them. I'm Marlon Morgan, licensed therapist and founder and CEO of Wellness Together, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the mental health of thousands of people every day. By the end of today's episode, you will have new practical skills that you can use today to improve your own mental health. Thank you so much for joining me and my longtime friend and fellow therapist, Jeremiah Aha, as we sit down for another authentic and vulnerable conversation with someone who is dedicated to helping others. What helps? Let's find out. I'm excited about our guest today. I'm not lacking enthusiasm, but I did have kind of a rough night.
Oh, no.
I was pretty psyched about having Dr. Anna Lembke on the show today. She specializes in addiction treatment.
She's a writer.
Yeah, she's an author, but she's also a doctor, a scientist. And don't take my kind of sort of low energy vibe right now as lack of enthusiasm.
Okay.
Like I said, I couldn't relax last night. Went to bed, saw my wife peacefully sleeping next to me, couldn't sleep, couldn't lay there anymore. All I could think about was, kind of what could I eat to kind of relax? Do you ever eat some kind of carbs or something to kind of just like relax?
Last night, 2 bowls of cereal. 3 bowls of cereal.
Cereal guy, huh?
Yeah, cereal guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of understand.
I do.
So I went down there, and what is kind of worst case scenario? Have you ever seen that movie Flight with Denzel Washington and John Goodman? Is like his
John Goodman?
Yeah,
and Denzel.
John Goodman's
timeless.
Yeah,
the guy is timeless.
Yeah. Denzel Washington.
That's right. Flight.
He plays an airline pilot who struggles with addiction.
Okay.
And I don't want to make light of this. And we do kind of an interesting thing on this show where we try to sometimes make a few jokes, but it also wade into some waters that are serious.
Yeah.
And that we want to help people with, improve their mental health.
Yeah.
Combat addiction.
Yes.
So part of what I'm going to say is clearly a real struggle, but part of it is to paint a word picture for you. And this is a spoiler, so if you haven't seen Flight yet, then I guess that's on you because it's like an old movie. But I am going to talk about the end. Denzel plays
Denzel's a pilot, or
he's the pilot.
Okay,
and he's battling alcohol. He's an alcoholic.
Okay,
and there's this pivotal scene towards the end of the movie where he has to go to court and kind of say the plane crashing. I think he saved a bunch of people, so he's kind of a hero, but also he was like kind of drunk during the whole thing. So he had to go to court and say I'm not responsible for the plane going down. And then, obviously in court, they're going to say, well, what about this? You're an alcoholic. So he has to convince everyone that he's not. But on the night before he goes to court and has this big day and says, hey, I'm fine, I'm sober, whatever.
Right.
John Goodman is his dealer. And
of alcohol?
Drugs. He's also addicted to drugs.
Okay. I was going to say, why didn't you just go to any store anywhere? to get alcohol?
Well, he was sort of like locking himself in the hotel room, kind of like a binding technique,
I see.
self-binding, which we'll talk about later. Dr. Anna Lembke in her book.
Some great things,
And so towards the end of the movie, Don Goodman shows up and is like, hey, dude, I got all these drugs. You want some? And it kind of ruins that. So he does a little bit of, he does some drugs. I can't remember which ones. And then he realizes that the door to the next room, he had the minibar emptied out in his room as to not get drunk the night before. He has to convince everyone.
Strategy.
To convince everyone that he's not an alcoholic. And then he realized the door to the adjoining room was open and the minibar was full. And it sort of foils him. That's the spoiler. And I think he drinks a bunch.
Spoil.
Obviously, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's in a much, I had an important day today because we're going to talk to one of my favorite authors.
Yeah.
And someone who I respect a ton and has helped thousands of people with addiction. Mm-hmm. I would say maybe more than thousands.
I think
tens
so.
Of thousands.
The book, 30 different languages, Dopamine Nation, has been translated into.
So last night, I go in. I'm just going to get like a healthy snack, maybe a bowl of cereal, sort of healthy, just like not overdo it. Mm-hmm. But then I realize the freezer lockbox is open.
Come again?
The freezer lockbox.
What are you, Cisco Foods? What is it?
You don't have a freezer lockbox?
No. What? I don't even know.
Okay, so when I read the book, 3 years ago for the first time.
Okay.
And here's the thing, if I eat a bunch of sugar or ice cream at night, I am worthless the next day. Oh. I can't think. I'm tired.
Yeah.
That's what happened last night. And we have so my wife, shout out Borat, my wife doesn't struggle.
I picture you watching her sleep, and I just can't help but think of the Police song.
First of all, don't.
Okay.
Second of all, we're past that part. I'm down in the kitchen now.
You're down in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Freezer lockbox.
I open the freezer. I'm just kind of, looking around, see what's going on. And freezer lockbox open. It's open. And this freezer lockbox is critically important for me to function.
What's in there?
Haagen-Dazs.
That's your kryptonite.
Yeah.
Chocolate peanut butter?
Haagen-Dazs chocolate peanut butter.
That's the worst.
It is
the best.
You
introduced that to me.
Unreal.
That's in there.
Yeah.
Essentially, you opened up a treasure chest.
Yeah.
And it is Uncle Scrooge pile of pennies in there.
Yeah. If I could have swam in it, I would, but it's only a pint.
He comes out and he's spitting out money too.
Yeah.
How filthy.
Disgusting.
Is that? Okay.
But I get it. If you feel the way Uncle Scrooge or Scrooge McDuck, or also shout out Glomgold, because I feel like he loves money even more than Scrooge McDuck.
I'm going to go shout out
Second
Launchpad
richest
McQuack.
duck.
Launchpad McQuack, that bomber jacket.
Yeah.
Been stunting since the early 90s.
Yeah, he's incredible.
Yeah.
He's incredible. Launchpad would be nothing without Gyro Gear Loose.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
He can drive the plane, but can he make it?
No. It's a real Steve and Steve situation.
Back to me and this ice cream.
Okay. I'm loving this journey.
Was that a Woz Jobs?
That was a Woz Jobs, yes,
okay.
For those that know.
Okay, great. So in that situation, is Jobs, Launchpad McQuack, and then Woz?
Woz is Gyro.
Gyro Gear Loose?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, it's a great combo.
Thanks.
And so
you open it up. There it is.
Yeah, open it up. Yeah, it's sort of right away. I know that I can do hard things. Shout out Glennon Doyle.
Yeah, but you are untamed.
But I've been known. And one thing I couldn't do was take the importance of today,
right,
and then put it into my mind and use it as fuel to not eat that ice cream.
That prefrontal not happening.
And if anyone thinks I'm blaming my wife here, I am.
Okay.
No, I'm not.
You're what?
No, okay. No. Yeah, that's right. No, I'm not. She shouldn't have to, and this is, and she's let me know this, she shouldn't have to lock up the ice cream. Let's be real.
I love the very subtle, she's let me know this too.
Yeah. She has on a few occasions, and I can't, what am I supposed to say? Everyone locks up the ice cream. No, that's fine. Everyone's just like a gremlin at night when everyone goes to sleep, they like rifle through the freezer.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's open. I ate it all. Here I am to tell a story. And I'm hoping, actually, since we're talking to one of the, I don't know if, I honestly, maybe the leading expert in addiction
Seems like
in the world.
Yeah, there we go.
Let's see if I can get her help. Yeah.
When we talk to her,
Yeah.
you're going to tell her this ice cream story, including Launchpad McQuack, John Goodman, Denzel Washington, and Borat.
As long as she doesn't tell me not to eat it, I'm good. I could literally have had to go to court today to convince everyone for my livelihood that I didn't crash a plane because of ice cream last night, and I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, it'd have been like peanut butter and chocolate in here.
Yeah. I would have had it on my shirt. Anyway, I'm glad we could make this about me, and hopefully there's someone out there who can relate. I know it's maybe a few.
All tremendous storytelling skills aside.
Especially when it comes to lockboxes in the freezer.
Yes. Yeah. If I'm listening to this, I definitely have already checked Amazon to find out what that's all about.
Okay. Well, make sure you take some responsibility over your own life and just lock your own lockbox. Because I think that's not a great moral. Because this whole time, no matter what I say, some people are going to think it's my wife's fault. I have no control.
Yeah, and you'd agree with them
over the what I eat.
Yeah.
So, but she's a saint.
Yes.
And I'm thankful for her. I'm also thankful for our next guest.
Yeah.
And cannot wait for her to get here and help me out.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I heard she helps. Dr. Anna Lembke, thank you for joining us. It's excellent to see you again.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
You are quickly, people say don't meet your heroes kind of thing. And I did get a chance to meet you after reading your book and loving your book and taking pages and pages of notes.
Thank you.
And I'll say the book I'm referring to is Dopamine Nation, one of a couple of books that you've written that are absolutely excellent. And, when I did get a chance to meet you, we got a chance to have lunch and talk a little bit about your work, but also your life to this point, how you've kind of gotten here, to be head of addiction medicine at Stanford. Is that how would you, what's your official title? How would you say that?
I am a professor of psychiatry and addiction medicine in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm also medical director in the Department of Addiction Medicine. I'm the program director for our Addiction Medicine Fellowship, and I'm also the chief of our outpatient addiction medicine dual diagnosis clinic. So I wear a lot of different administrative and clinical hats.
I heard that you're not bored. That's what I just heard.
I'm not bored.
Got
I'm not bored enough.
Happening. Yeah. So, well, as you were saying that, I was again overwhelmed with gratitude for the time that you've chosen to spend with us.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. How did you get to be all of these things?
First of all, I'm old.
Okay.
So, that really counts for a lot. Okay. A lot of times I talk to young people, medical students or undergraduates, they see the CV, multiple pages. It feels so daunting, but what they really forget is that I've lived for 56 years and I've been a psychiatrist for 25. And so, that old adage, like 99% of success in life is just showing up and the other 1% is showing up on time is really, really true. Like you just got to keep coming back, as they say. And I don't know. I mean, it wasn't like I was aiming for what I'm doing. I just found myself kind of accidentally, doing work in addiction at a time when not that many other people were interested in the field. Mm-hmm. And so it's really by accident and default that kind of the spotlight of our society shifted onto the thing that I happened to already be doing. So that's a little, it's kind of accidental. Mm-hmm. And just the fact that I just keep showing up, doing the same thing.
A bit of a timing issue.
Yes.
Also a lot of hard work. And we try to talk to people who are helping others, helping our culture, our society. You're like a super helper, everything you said. And I know personally, as I mentioned before, there's things in my life that have changed for the better upon reading your work and kind of how you've worked with some of your clients. And I love that you were, sort of open and honest about some of your own struggles in the book. And so that was very relatable. But did you always know that you wanted to sort of help people for a living? Because I don't know if that's how you view it, but that's how I see you.
Yeah. So it's interesting. When I was an undergraduate at Yale, I had this very odd professor who was a writer, and she was a woman, in her 50s, about the age I am now. And she said, well, what do you care about? What do you want to do? And I just said, I just really would like to be needed, right? I would like to be able to, that somehow I'm feeling like Thomas the Tank Engine, I'm useful.
Yeah. Great.
And what was really interesting to me was her reaction, which was quite negative.
Oh.
Like, that's all you want to do? You just want to be needed? And I think that's a generational, I don't know, I'm speculating, obviously don't know.
Yeah.
But it's a generational thing where I think many women of that generation kind of were trying to get out of that helper mode.
Okay.
And were, that's sort of what I wanted. That's what mattered to me. And that's still true. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because, if you're too invested in being needed, you're also vulnerable to a lot of codependency type stuff, which is a whole thing
Yes, it is.
in and of itself, which can
familiar.
be...
I'm familiar.
That's
As a
right.
fellow
Yeah,
therapist,
right. Yeah, exactly. So that can be its own Achilles heel. But that was just that's been since early on, something that I've identified with, is wanting to be of service.
What's interesting about that story is that that professor, it sounds like, sort of strengthened your resolve in I don't know.
Not at all.
Oh, okay.
No.
So it made you waver a little bit.
Yeah.
100% wrong, Marlon. That's okay. No, that's great.
No. I mean, I wish that were true, but instead it really made me think, like there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Like, I guess there's some other reason that should be propelling, but I didn't ever find it. So here I am.
I'm so glad you stuck with it. Yeah. I think a lot of us are. Also, shout out Thomas the Tank.
Right.
And,
Thomas,
schemer,
the useful
the
engine.
conductor.
Right.
Yep.
Those things are, there's a lot of wisdom in Thomas the Tank Engine.
I don't know if you know, also, there's another person who's really sort of summarized in their most recent book, Be Useful. And are you familiar with that?
No. I'm always really embarrassed when people bring up books I feel like I should have read, but I haven't.
I don't know. I don't know if you're going to be, sort of proud that you didn't hear. I'm not sure. I think. Do
you think she'll even know the person?
I don't know. He's Austrian. He was a bodybuilder for a long time.
What does he sound like?
He's kind of like, my dad used to say, be useful, Arnold. If there's anything you do in life.
This is Arnold.
Yeah. Okay, good.
That was fully a setup. I knew you would know. I was trying to walk in.
I'm a big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan.
His
I
new
love
book
Arnold.
is called Be Useful.
Oh, that's
and
great.
So, and so hopefully because you said that and because I did this horrible impression, maybe he'll also want to join us on the show.
Arnold recently was filling in potholes near his home because the city wasn't taking care of it. Right? So then he went and just sort of did it himself. I don't know. That's kind of cool.
I love that story. Yeah.
But I think they had to undo the whole thing. It ended up costing twice as much or something. But I don't know. But that wouldn't surprise me.
Oh, Arnold.
Yeah, poor guy.
Yeah. And he couldn't say, this is the former governor. Can you do fill a few potholes?
It's just potholes would get down.
The potholes were probably caused by his mini horse and donkey that live in his house. I don't know if you know about that.
No,
inside the house.
I don't want to know more about that.
All right.
No.
Well, I can see Dr. Lemke wants to move on.
Yes, moving right along.
Below her pay grade at this point.
No, it's a too vivid imagination.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to go there.
Okay. All right. Well, in prepping for our time here today, I want to.
By the way, we're already having too much fun.
Oh,
you realize.
This is too much. Okay,
we're done. Way straight from the topic. Okay.
I think.
So can you call him?
Yeah.
Can you just see if he can?
I think hopefully people will like this because one of the the differences, I think, of what we're trying to do here and talking to people like yourself, it's obvious that you've been super helpful. It's obvious that you are, whether you will admit it or not, and I don't think you will right now, but is that you're one of the smartest people on the earth. But it gave me the idea that maybe I could use this time to really spend an hour and have personal therapy with one of the world's leading psychiatrists. Is that something you're open to?
We could do that.
That's
I mean,
good.
yeah,
There's no cameras here, microphones or anything. I think we could just jump right in.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more on the vulnerable side, but there is this thing that I keep doing, and so I'll have like a good day at work and everything's fine. I feel pretty balanced. I didn't feel especially stressed out or anything like that. And then I go home, I have 2 boys, spend time with them and my wife. I love that. That's okay. Everything's going well. This is a good day. And then, maybe I'll watch an old Law and Order with my wife. She loves Gorin and Eames. That's the era. It's her era. And then she goes to sleep. No problem.
Right.
I lay there for to me, feels like an eternity. I think it's about 10 minutes. All I can think about is eating. I think about what might be in the fridge, what might have got overlooked from a couple nights ago.
Right.
Do we have any chocolate peanut butter Haagen-Dazs? That's a recipe for disaster for me. And I end up going down there and getting terrible. So I do not want to do this.
So do you do it? You get up and you go get the food? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
well, what else? I mean,
obviously. Right.
I know it doesn't make sense now, and I'm hearing myself say it, which is part of therapy. So I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, that's right.
And I don't think this is the best use of your time. But
no, you know what? This is really important because food, especially ultra processed food with the addition of sugar, fat, salt, and flavorants, is a drug.
Okay, that makes sense.
There are so many people in the world today, but especially in wealthy nations where we have an abundant food supply, who are struggling with appetitive control around food consumption, and it takes up a lot of energy and a lot of time, causes a lot of suffering, contributes to obesity, which contributes to morbidity and mortality. Yeah. I mean, why do you think we have so many people trying to get on Wegovy and Ozempic? I mean, this is real. People really struggling with appetitive control around food because food has been drugified, made more potent, more available, more novel, and more bountiful, right?
So now I need another drug to get me not to do that.
Well, joking aside, I'm excited that the pharmaceutical pipeline is focusing in this area.
Okay.
Because, yes, in some ideal world, we would all be able to meditate ourselves away from cravings, right? But the truth of the matter is, when you live in a world where you're surrounded by highly reinforcing substances and behaviors, including your food supply, which you can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to quit food."
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And you have to eat it. It's not only everywhere, but you need to eat, right, to live. It becomes extremely challenging, especially if on top of that, you are physiologically vulnerable to food addiction. And by the way, that varies, right? Just like some people, their vulnerability is cocaine. Other people, it's alcohol. And other people, it is food. And if that is your particular drug of choice, wow. Yeah. Really, really tough in the world that we live in today. And if there are, medications that can help with that, I think it's important that we explore them.
That's wonderful. I think I feel hopeful, and I appreciate you talking to me about it.
I guess I'd put a little caveat around that, though. Traditionally, what we've looked to is to use stimulants, which are themselves addictive, to help people with food addiction. That's not something we want. We want to find something that's not itself addictive in terms of medications and doesn't cause other serious problems like suicidal ideation, right? Which has been the problem with some past medications that were being looked at to help people with appetitive control around food. So this is a really tricky area. How do you find that medication that's going to be helpful without causing, its own set of problems.
And you're saying that there are now, and you're excited about the drugs that are being developed to sort of curb. How do those drugs work? Do they?
Well, let me just say, this is not an endorsement of those drugs. Okay, not at all. And I wouldn't want to go there in any shape or form. These are drugs that were actually developed to help people with type 2 diabetes, help people with obesity. Incidentally, they're showing that people who have alcohol use disorder can benefit. Some people can benefit from these medications that were developed for diabetes, probably because the same thing that helps with appetitive control around carbohydrates helps with appetitive control around alcohol, because alcohol is carbohydrate mediated. My broader message, without getting into the specifics of any particular drug, is that we need help. And we're going to find this help in many different ways. But when it comes to food addiction, we are now literally, changing our anatomy, removing stomachs, reconnecting and reanastomosing sections of our intestine.
I don't even know what that means, but
I'll tell you about it later.
Sleeve band, Roux-en-Y. My point is, this is the first time in human history where we have to change our anatomy and change our physiology so that we can be healthy in the world that we live in today. The point being that food addiction is only partially your problem. Okay. Food addiction is an ecosystem problem. One of the biggest risk factors for addiction is simple access to our drug of choice. If you live in a neighborhood where drugs are sold and available on the street corner, you're more likely to try them and you're more likely to get addicted to them. If you live in a world where even bread has sugar in it, right, you are more likely to find that you have appetitive control problems around consumption of what used to be healthy foods, and you're more likely to struggle with that. So
I feel like you have treated this with the perfect balance of empathy and accountability, which
it's a mixture.
What I would expect from
one of the smartest people in the world. Yeah. I love that it started as maybe 60% of a bit, and turned into actually something that was profoundly helpful, and just understanding the hows and whys and what we can
do. For better or for worse, it's 100% not a bit.
Right.
And I do find everything you said very helpful. I purposely have not looked into those drugs because of my propensity to be a little bit extreme when it comes to just about anything. And I had a friend that I grew up with who took fen-phen. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And he developed some pretty bad side effects. And so in my mind, I keep saying like, gosh, it might seem good. Like everyone thought that was like an incredible drug then. And then,
until
had some, and he actually had some of the side effects, which ended up being really, really terrible for him.
Oh yeah. No, this is not at all an endorsement of any particular weight loss medication, including the ones that I mentioned.
Yeah.
This is really just a matter of saying that the physiologic burden on us as human beings in a world in which food has become drugified is enormous.
Drugified is a great word for me.
And I also just want to say that, I think for you to openly talk about the fact that you have those food cravings, when your wife has fallen asleep, you've had a good day. It's not like you had a bad day or you're under too much stress. It's just like you're just living your life. And yet your drug of choice is probably food.
It is.
And then you've got this activated food craving. And that's like a burden that you have to carry through your life. And it's hard. It's super hard. So we've got to really think, individually and collectively, how are we going to address this? Whether your drug of choice is food, or whether it's sex, or whether it's video games, or Snapchat, or shopping, or gambling, or alcohol, or cannabis, or whatever it is, we have to sort of come together, acknowledge our vulnerability based on our ancient wiring, and then find solutions.
Hey, Jeremiah here. Question for you. Where are you going to be on World Mental Health Day 2024? That's October 10th, by the way. Where are you going to be? You can join me. You can join our podcast host, Marlon Morgan, and 2,000 other leaders in mental health, education, technology, healthcare, philanthropy, entertainment, and more at the beautiful Anaheim Convention Center in Southern California on October 9th through 11th for the 8th annual Wellness Together Conference. Consider this your very own personal invitation. So this is much more than just a 3-day event. You see, together, we're uniting passionate individuals from around the world that are dedicated to increasing mental health awareness, advocacy, and access for everyone. Learn more and register at wellnesstogether.org/conference. We have virtual and in-person tickets available. And for This Helps listeners, that's you get a 10% discount code when you use This Helps, all lowercase, there for a promo code. We're honored to continue partnering with the California Department of Education as they sponsor the Student and Educator Mental Wellness Track. Hope to see you at the 8th Annual Wellness Together Conference, Anaheim Convention Center, October 9th through 11th. Head now to wellnesstogether.org/conference. Back to the show.
I love, you mentioned sort of the vulnerability that sort of is innate for all of us. I imagine that's different for everyone. And there's probably a nurture and nature aspect. What does it mean, and what does it look like? Or maybe better ask, what causes that vulnerability? Like scientifically, is there something you can help us understand?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when we think about vulnerability or risk factors for addiction, I like to group them into nature, nurture, and neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about nature, we're talking about the inherited risk. Okay. And people come into this world with differing degrees of vulnerability to the problem of addiction, especially when you're looking at traditional drugs like alcohol and the other drugs that people usually think of: opioids, stimulants, cannabis, what have you. It's polygenic, so it's not like we're going to find the one addiction gene, right?
Yeah,
it's going to be
many ways to brought into existence.
That's right. And the inherited aspect is based on family studies and twin studies showing that if you have a biological parent or grandparent with addiction, especially the studies in the realm of alcohol addiction, then you are at increased risk compared to the general population of getting addicted to alcohol yourself, even if raised outside of that substance using home. So for example, they've done adoption studies where even if you are at birth, moved to a home where there's not addiction going on, if you had a biological parent or grandparent with addiction, you are more likely to get addicted yourself as you go along. So that
makes sense.
Yeah. So that, and again, what is the nature of the genetic load? We don't know, but there's some preliminary work suggesting that individuals with dopamine insensitivity, that is, people who need more stimulus to feel a dopamine hit or to get a response, are more vulnerable to addiction.
Sense. Yeah.
It does, kind of like reward insensitivity. People with co-occurring mental illness, people with bipolar disorder, attention deficit disorder, we know that those individuals are at higher risk for developing addiction, probably related to some frontal lobe cognitive processing and or emotion dysregulation, which increases vulnerability for addiction. We know that the character trait of impulsivity is an inborn risk factor. Impulsivity is the difficulty pressing the pause button between the thought or desire to do something and actually doing it. And so people who are more impulsive, who have more ability delaying gratification, are individuals who are at higher risk for addiction. So this is kind of the work that's going on, trying to characterize the complex polygenetic nature of the inherited risk. But we do know that about 50 to 60% of the risk of developing addiction is genetic or inborn, which is a really heavy load.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's more than
majority.
half.
Right. Yeah. But still, that means there's a whole other half that's, non-determined. And then in terms of nurture, all of the usual things, if you are raised in a home where your caregivers explicitly or implicitly condone substance use as recreation or as coping, you're at higher risk. If there's a sexual, physical, emotional abuse, you're at higher risk. If trauma, all puts you at higher risk. And the neighborhood is the access thing, right? If you've got more access, you've got more risk, but also poverty, unemployment, all of those things increase risk of addiction.
When you talk about the nature and the neighborhood piece, I almost feel like you're getting at that pleasure-pain balance that you've talked about, which is almost like if we're experiencing the pain, then maybe we try to displace it with some high reinforcement, when it comes to pleasure. Is that?
Yeah.
What does it mean? Because you've talked about the pleasure, the pleasure and the pain sort of area in the brain being the same area
Right.
before. What is
Mhm.
that like? Is that part of the nature and the access piece, and how is that related?
Yeah, I mean, it's so, I mean, addiction is a biopsychosocial disease, right?
Yeah.
There's the biological piece, psychological piece, social piece. But at the end of the day, it's really the interface between our brains and the environment that we find ourselves in, right? So if we define addiction as the continued compulsive use of a substance or behavior despite harm to self and or others, what we really need to do is identify the harm, right? And if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, we are evolutionarily designed to reflexively approach pleasure and avoid pain. We do that's sort of like the operating system, right? Yeah, that's how we stay alive. And for most of human existence, we've lived in a world of scarcity and ever-present danger. And so that mechanism for processing pleasure and pain, that pleasure-pain balance, which I talk about, is what keeps us seeking out new and novel pleasures, never satisfied with what we have, always wanting more. So you can imagine that in that kind of environment, people who are genetically predisposed for what we today call addiction are actually going to be the most valuable members of our tribe, right? Because they're willing to walk further and work harder to get
Searching behavior.
Right, exactly. But today, it's kind of a liability because we don't, swipe right, swipe left, you're done.
Yeah, there's not. Yeah, having to find food in the forest is markedly more difficult than swiping.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, is that what I'm hearing?
That's right.
So I want to talk a little bit about how everything you've mentioned so far affects our culture. And maybe this is part of my therapy session as well, because I'm a little worried, as some of us, as some people are, about where we're headed. For a long time, my experience was, before I was able to, get some experience traveling around the world and meeting people from other places, I thought that the way that America was very, centered on my own experience. That I thought that American culture was like the world's culture, and we sort of exported it. And most places that had media were experiencing similar, the same things we were. But it's been, twice, I would say, in the last year, I have talked to someone. I got a chance to visit some mental health centers in Denmark not too long ago, and we did this great tour. It was just a wonderful place and seemed like a great place for healing, a good, safe environment. And then I asked the director of the center, "Okay, where do you keep your files? And what? Can you show me the documentation process?" And she did. She showed me. It was relatively, I would say, there was not as much documentation as you would see here at a place that provides, mental health care. And then I said, "Well, what happens if you get sued? What happens in a sort of a malpractice situation?" And she said, "Well, we have 26 centers across the country, and in the last 20 years, we've had 2 written complaints." And I said, "No." I said, "What happens if you get sued?" And she said, and she's so nice, so respectful, so Danish. And she said, "Marlon, that's more of an American thing." And that happened again. We were working with, you may know Dr. Joseph Cherokee. He has worked a lot with Dr. Stephen Hayes on ACT's acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's a really wonderful, kind of iteration, or I would call it an evolution of CBT. So it's something that cognitive behavior therapy is something to look into. But I was talking to Dr. Cherokee about a project we were working on for students, and he was creating the platform and making it so that students could experience acceptance and commitment therapy through an online platform. And he kept putting in things about evolution, and he kept putting in, things about, getting killed. And if you didn't do this well on the savannah or in, early civilization, you would have died. You would have got killed. And I kept saying, "Joseph, we can't keep, this is going in our schools, and, we can't keep making our kids think about this. They're already doing drills. They're already nervous about that." And it was so foreign to me. I'm like, this guy is top 1% scientist on Google Scholar. Like he's like, and I know he's smarter than I am. Why does he keep doing this? And then he said the same. He said, Marlon, school shootings, that's more of an American thing. And I think of Australia, like I've never been there, but I think of Australia like pretty similar to us. Like not at all, apparently. So I tell those long stories to ask you what implications you had mentioned in your book that we as Americans sort of experience more pain than a lot of other nations. You've mentioned that, I think one of the quotes that I remember that I really thought was incredibly insightful, and that Americans, and I'm probably going to mess it up, but Americans don't necessarily argue with their ideas and with their words, but more with images and photos and visions of success. Is all this related?
Yeah, well, I'm always sort of nervous wading into broad generalizations and statements about culture, right?
Sure.
Because
this is just to help me, Anna.
I know. Yeah. I know where you're going with this. Because gosh, it's a powerful influence in human, in the human tapestry.
Yeah.
But even within one community, you can have microcultures that are as different as the cultures across countries. So, but I mean, what we can say based on data is that Americans report having more physical pain than people from any other developed nation. At the same time, Americans consume more prescription opioids than any other nation.
Wow.
Right? That's
stunning. I mean, I know that you're used to knowing that information, but someone who just heard that, can you say it one more time?
Sure. Yeah. So again, if you do like surveys on people reporting physical pain, Americans report more physical pain than Europeans, than Japanese, on and on, right? Mm-hmm. So what we're doing is we're comparing countries that are sort of equal in wealth and equal in terms of access to healthcare. I mean, yeah, we have different healthcare systems. We can go
also,
on
we're
about...
tough, right? Because this is making it sound like maybe Americans aren't that tough. But go.
Well, I mean,
no, we're number one.
Yeah,
we're
the best
we're
around.
The best
right? No, I just want to point that out because weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, we have more and more people coming in with pain in many different parts of their body with no physical evidence of injury or disease to explain that pain. So this is a very modern phenomenon, right? Like even 100 years ago, there was no concept of pain separate from physical injury. Wow. Now pain is its own medical specialty, and people have pain with no physical injury and no disease. Sometimes this is referred to as centralizing pain disorders, in recognition that you can have pain, the source of which originates in the brain, right? Which makes it very similar, in my opinion, to a psychiatric disorder requiring a very different type of intervention. But the pain is real subjectively for that individual. They have pain. Likewise, psychological suffering. What we've seen in the last 20 years is that rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide are going up in many wealthy nations in the world. And they're going up all over the world, but especially depression and anxiety. Suicide varies country to country. It's going up here in the United States. We had some of our highest suicide rates this past year. Very sad. But it's paradoxical because rates of depression and anxiety are going up fastest in the wealthiest nations in the world. So again, kind of begging the question, wow, these are countries where people really have all of their hierarchy of needs, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Also, these are countries where people have the best access to mental health treatment, where we're prescribing the most antidepressants, anxiolytics, and mood stabilizers. And yet, more and more depression, So it really does beg the question, what are we getting wrong, right? Like, where did mental health treatment somehow go astray? If even when people have access to treatment, they're not necessarily getting better.
Sounds like a spiral, that is one that is unfortunately not on the way up.
Yeah, I mean, it's been referred to as our mental health crisis,
Mhm.
and I think it's real. And I don't think it's like we're wimps or something like that. Like I don't like that characterization. I think people
I
are.
don't either, by the way. I
Yeah,
just think
yeah.
I was just
I
kind
know,
of joking
and I
about.
wasn't
Yeah.
implying that you were characterizing people, but a lot of times, even
But I'm not a wimp, though.
even millennials or Gen Zers, they'll
Yeah.
kind of come in, and on top of feeling depressed and anxious, they'll feel guilty,
Right.
right? Because they'll
Suffering
feel like,
on suffering.
right.
Oh,
Like
wow.
I shouldn't feel this way because I can see objectively I have all of these
Shame
privileges.
about their anxiety
Right.
and sadness.
So that's why, for me, I really want to try to understand, well, why are we so unhappy?
Yeah.
What is it? And really, I think it's because we have insulated ourselves from pain at the same time that we have more access to more highly reinforcing, pleasurable substances and behaviors than at any point in human history. And the result is that we're essentially getting our dopamine reward pathways out of balance, right?
Mhm.
And to compensate for the fire hose of dopamine or pleasurable stimuli, our brains are down regulating not just to baseline, but below baseline, this dopamine deficit state, which, by the way, is experienced exactly the same as clinical depression, anxiety, inattention, insomnia, all of it. So, it's a kind of a counterintuitive hypothesis that really maybe in working so hard to insulate ourselves from experiencing pain, we're actually contributing to the experience of pain.
That is paradoxical and feels somewhat hopeless, but maybe to the point where it'll hopefully motivate us.
To me, it's really
pain can be
it's really
motivating.
hopeful.
Yeah.
To me, it's really hopeful because it basically informs what we need to do differently in terms of to intervene to help people, right? Instead of, saying, okay, you're uncomfortable doing that, don't do it. Or, you're feeling anxious, take some Xanax.
Yeah.
We're instead saying, hey, we're actually evolved to experience pain like that. That's sort of our life mandate.
Mm-hmm.
And so since we live in this world that doesn't give us opportunities to do that, we have to kind of re-engineer the world that we live in. And, you mentioned acceptance and commitment therapy. I mean, acceptance and commitment therapy is really all about that, but using different language. It's basically about saying, hey, if you're feeling anxious, don't try to stop feeling that way.
Right.
Like, look at that feeling.
Don't feel anxious. Don't feel anxious. Don't feel anxious.
Right. Sit with it, explore it, realize you're not the only one. I think that's the other thing too, is that we've pathologized suffering, right? We've said, if you're unhappy or if you're anxious, something's wrong. Go to the doctor, take a pill. Instead of this idea, hey, life is hard. We're all suffering. We're not alone in our suffering. And of course, when we know we're not alone, it also makes it easier to endure.
That whole idea that the sort of, there's a natural, what does Dr. Hayes call it? It's like I think he calls it a natural, I can't remember. I'll have to look it up later. But it's just the idea that exactly what you said, life is hard. And, it seems like I can't help but think if there's money to be made off of solving a problem, or at least seeming like we're solving a problem, then that has to be, and you mentioned being in the richest nations or, is part of what goes into the recipe of making, and this is your term, so tell me if I'm misusing it, but I'm going to say, are these dopamine nations the ones that you're, are they, because I know the book is Dopamine Nation, but, and so I want to feel a little bit, spread the love a little bit and say, it's not just America, because you've mentioned that.
Right.
Is it any place that we see a profit to be made when there's pain and then we sort of quickly take away the pain? Is that?
Yeah, I think this is in many ways the natural culmination of any successful capitalist system.
Yeah.
Right. Capitalism is a great way to leverage human ingenuity and striving. But, the final sort of culmination of a successful capitalist system is to turn us all into addicts, right? Into the ultimate consumers.
That was scary.
Yeah, that is scary. And so,
I thought you were,
right.
I thought what you were saying is, that's okay, Marlon. Everything's fine. Capitalism's fine. And then I like echoed through my ears, as long as we all become batteries in the matrix,
Right,
as long as we're all
right.
addicts,
Yeah.
I was like, you really lulled me into that one.
Yeah, down the garden path.
Yeah.
It's I mean, and it's not to say that I'm advocating to overthrow capitalism, or I'm not an economist. I don't even really. I mean, people. I'm not a socialist. I don't. It's not. That's not where I spend my time.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth just acknowledging that deeply embedded within our economic system is this kind of, I shop, therefore I am type of attitude. So,
well, that was also, it'd take me a second.
Pause on that.
Yeah.
I consume, therefore I have value.
Yeah.
I remember the first quote that you sent me, Marlon, from a couple of years ago when you were first reading.
Yeah, I got really excited and started texting quotes to Jeremiah and some other friends.
Yeah,
she has it figured out. This is everything. And I want to get back to that.
Yeah.
All right, after I talk over you,
hit me.
The thing I was most excited about your book is, like, for me, if I wrote a book and I had the knowledge you do, it would just be like scaring everyone and like, this is doomed. We're all totally screwed here. But your book says, this is how I help people.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you can do. I bought like a kitchen safe after that.
And, did you really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and
I love it.
We actually just got it back out because my wife bought some Moose Tracks ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
So actually not too long before I left to come down here, or up here, I opened the fridge and it was like a loud noise, but it's like, goosh, like, and it was just, I saw that stupid lockbox and I was like, I know there's ice cream in there. But then I like thought of you and I was like, thanks, Dr. Lembke.
The self-binding.
Yeah, the self-binding that she talks about. Anyway, okay, so I text you. I want to see where you're going with that.
Yeah. It's a tie-in to what's being said right now, and it's beautifully set up, beautifully written, and that is why in these developed, richest nations, access to anything we'd ever need. Maslow's hierarchy is filled.
Right.
I think we'd all agree there's one area where it's not, and that's in terms of our meaningful relationships. However, why are we so unhappy?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's what listeners are thinking, like, well, hey, she just said we have access to all these things. We can get any drug we want. We have all these forms of entertainment. Why is it? And your answer and how you phrased it and what hit me, and I was like, oh, it's because we're avoiding unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying so hard. We're striving, and painfully so to avoid being unhappy is kind of what I got from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that pleasure and pain are relative. And again, that this is like physiology. I think it's really important to sort of validate and respect the biology behind it, which is, this kind of that pleasure and pain are co-located in the brain. They work like opposite sides of a balance. That the balance wants to remain level, or what neuroscientists call homeostasis. That means with any deviation from neutrality, our brains are going to work really hard to restore homeostasis. And they do that by basically tilting an equal and opposite amount to whatever the initial stimulus was.
Is this where the gremlins come in?
This is the gremlins.
Yes.
So when we do something that's pleasurable, it releases dopamine, the reward pathway. Our pleasure-pain balance tilts to the side of pleasure. No sooner does that happen than our brain starts doing the work it needs to do to bring it level again.
Balance us back out.
Right. And I like to imagine that as these neuroadaptation gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance to bring it level again. But they like it on the balance, so they don't get off right when we're level. They stay on until we're tilted an equal and opposite amount to the side of pain. That's the come down, the hangover, the after effect.
They don't trust you? They think like, Marlon, I think we got to stick around here just in case you don't get us that ice cream again. I just got to keep reminding you.
Hard to know what the gremlins are thinking.
Yeah.
But your point.
Sorry,
your point is well made. Like, dudes, why don't you get off when it's level? Right?
Yeah.
That's so mean.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's like a pendulum, right? That once it goes up this way, it's got to correct this way. That's just how it works. And this opponent process mechanism, we have a lot of different physiologic functions. For like vision works like this, for example, like the black, is the dress black or is it yellow? The reason that it's because some of those color cones are opposite. I'm sure I'm going to screw this up, but it's like you can't see.
This is the most controversial thing you've said so far.
You can't see red and green at the same time. And if you look at something red red for a long time, you get an after image of green. So there are a lot of physiologic symptoms. So if you do something that's intensely pleasurable by ingesting an intoxicant, like Moose Track ice cream, which I also love, there's a come down from that. You pay a price, there's a cost, okay? But if you only have one bowl and then you stop.
You want carton?
Okay, no, the carton is where you're going wrong here.
Okay, because it's shaped like a bowl.
I'm sure it is.
For me, it's inviting, but anyway.
I love to be sitting in on this therapy session.
Yeah,
this
right,
is great.
Right.
Yes.
If you stop after one bowl, the gremlins get the memo that they're no longer needed. They hop off the pain side of the balance.
Still sending memos, those gremlins.
Right, they like their memos.
Noted.
And homeostasis is restored. And you're like, okay, I'm good. And you go on with your day, right? You're out of that vortex of craving created by the gremlins on the pain side of the balance. But the second rule of the balance is that with repeated exposure to the same or similar reinforcing stimulus, that initial deflection to the pleasure side gets weaker and shorter in duration, but that after response to pain gets stronger and longer. In other words, those gremlins start to multiply. Now they're lifting weights. They look like Arnold.
Yeah,
right?
they're definitely useful.
Right. They're camped out there on the pain side of the balance. And now we're entering into addicted brain, where we've essentially changed our hedonic threshold or our hedonic or joy set point. Now we need to eat a carton of Moose Tracks, not to like get pleasure from eating ice cream, but just to level the balance and feel normal.
And go to sleep.
Right, and go to sleep.
Yeah, I want to sleep.
Right.
That's the problem is if I could just go to sleep, I sit there, I look at my wife, she's like peacefully dreaming, and I love it because I love her.
Right.
But I'm also so jealous.
Right. So you're someone for whom, let's just say sugar, because we know that sugar releases dopamine in the reward pathway, and that we know that it does. Let's just say sugar's that's your special difficulty, right? So you're trying to moderate. You're just trying to stick to the bowl. But what happens is you have so many gremlins now that are activated by sugar, right? Because of your propensity, because of your exposure to sugar over many years, that they're all waiting in the wings. Even after they hop off that pain side of the balance, they're waiting. So homeostasis is restored, like you haven't had, ice cream in a while, but they're waiting. So now you have a tiny little bit of exposure, all of them pile on again, and you're immediately in that state of craving, which is why for someone like you, I would actually consider recommending that you abstain from sugar, that you view sugar as an allergen for your system and you consider cutting it out of your system because it's just your drug of choice. And I mean, when I hear you lying in bed thinking about going to the refrigerator and getting the Moose Track, I'm
totally visualizing it.
I feel enormous empathy for you because that state of craving is really, really painful. And
I know people have real life-threatening addictions, and I don't want to at all. I have heard other people bring up like, "Oh, I got this addiction," and like. They're like in this opioid crisis, and all of a sudden I'm whining about this ice cream. So I would just want to be clear, as a therapist and as a person with empathy, and as a person who comes from a family with addiction, I understand this isn't life or death, at least in the moment. I know that eventually it is. So I just wanted to quickly disclaimer that so I didn't feel like a jerk. So go ahead.
Got it. Thanks for that's a good point.
But your empathy and validation so far, I can't get enough of. So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So, so in order to not be in that state of painful craving every night, you might want to consider abstaining for long enough, see if you can get those gremlins off the pain side of the balance, reset homeostasis, and then, see how you feel.
Yeah.
Because sometimes trying to moderate our drug of choice is actually more work and more exhausting than just cutting it out of
It almost
lives.
makes it like a game a little bit. It's like, can I, and I think, and you've mentioned this before, and that is like just thinking about, how do I get that? I think in your book you mentioned the one patient who made a really long straw to get to the wine that was locked up, versus he could have just gone to like Bevmo or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is where you have then all the interpersonal aspects, if your wife locked up the ice cream, but it wasn't you who locked up the ice cream.
I was blaming you.
Right. And I'm going to put it back on you and your wife.
This is why we brought you here.
Right. So this is now you have all the different levels of codependency. It's like now all of a sudden, are you resenting her because she's asleep and she locked up the ice cream and you want some ice cream? Right. So
I'm a victim and I'm going to persecute and I just want to be the ice cream hero.
Dr. Lembke, I have a couple more, sort of areas that I personally want to cover with you. Okay. And one of them, you mentioned earlier, you talked about Dr. Abraham Maslow. And I recently had the opportunity to prepare something for a course. So at Harvard Medical, and they have this this mentoring program, and it's really, really neat. And part of what I was tasked with is creating a 90-minute lecture and a curriculum to go along with that on, looking out for our own mental wellness as helpers and as people who are going to mentor. And these are for the students, older students, have been in the program a little bit longer, and they're mentoring the students who are just getting an HMS. And so I had to take this and really enjoyed it. Very deep dive into Abraham Maslow and his work. And so earlier you had mentioned we have so many of the basic needs in a lot of developed countries or rich nations, or however, I think after this podcast, everyone's going to be calling it the dopamine nations. Mm-hmm. But the one thing I thought about, and when you said that, was actually, I'm wondering, the whole idea of self-actualization at the top of the pyramid. Where are we now? When Maslow was doing a lot of his writing, it was in the 1960s and 70s. And I'm wondering, our culture now, are we closer? Are more of us closer to self-actualization? That whole idea of like, this is everything I can be during this life. And it's not like an end destination. It's like a journey. And self-actualization continues, and it has to do with your relationships. The one way that I like to think of it is living out your chosen purpose, but doing that in meaningful relationship with others. And so, I came across this other sort of depressing stat. It's not even a stat. It was an estimation from something that Dr. Maslow wrote. He said that only 1% of the population, he, in his estimation, would ever reach that top of the pyramid, self-actualization. I'm wondering, becoming a nation and a culture that has so many opportunities to sort of make ourselves happy or distracted on somewhere along Maslow's hierarchy before we get to that top area of self-actualization. Are we going forwards or backwards? And do we really have everything on the pyramid? Because it seems like, and this could just be my pessimism or watching the news, but it seems like less of us are thinking about what we want to do at the time here on earth and purposefully living out each moment in meaningful relationship with others, like with some goals in mind.
Yeah, great question. For me personally, this comes down to this inflection point that we're living in now with the transition from living in a world where the average person believed that some kind of supernatural force, infused the universe. Mm-hmm. To
like a life force?
Life force, God, whatever language you want to use, to the growing secularization of society that we've seen since the Enlightenment, and the sort of emphasis on science, this idea that we are living in essentially empty space, kind of a purposeless. Nobody really knows.
Right. I can't know, so I don't know. Or
right, and I think it. I mean, if I could time travel, I would want to time travel far enough to see what human beings did with this, because it's a huge inflection point in human history, and I don't think anybody knows where it's going to go. But it does mean that. As we think about self-actualization and like reaching at the top of some kind of pyramid, we don't even know what the pyramid is. Like we really, that's what people don't even know. And then on top of that, you can sort of turn like the biohacking of self-actualization into its own kind of, a sort of rat wheel,
Distraction.
or
Addiction.
or whatever. So it's a huge inflection point. May you live in interesting times. We live in very interesting times, but I think it is a time of a lot of sort of struggle on this very like deep existential level. Well, like, if it's not that, what is it going to be? And I don't have the answer.
I got so excited when we first met because you were one of the first, I would say, top scientists, doctors, researchers, authors that I've met who was willing to acknowledge the importance of spirituality when it comes to human beings and healing and the process of healing. In a general sense, is there something, in your opinion, about that? Is that partly what makes us human? How important is that?
Well, I do think just like our pleasure-pain balance is sort of this ancient mechanism, deeply wired, conserved across species, millions of years of evolution. I mean, I think we have sort of this spiritual pathways, circuits, networks, very biologically embedded for a spiritual life, some kind of practice and belief system that answers the questions that science, for all of its achievements, will never be able to answer, along the lines of, why are we here? What is my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Not so much preoccupation with what happens when I die. I really think that's less important than the kind of logos or meaning that people
pragmatism,
are just trying to look for, like why are we alive, and what should I be doing? What should I be pursuing?
In the here and now.
Right. In the here and now, or tomorrow, or however, you conceptualize your journey through time. And that's just a deep human need, and it's going to continue to be deep human need. And I think right now we're mostly ignoring it and kind of trying to distract ourselves with YouTube.
It is on Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah,
certainly as part of what makes us human.
Right.
I've always asked that question, even as an undergrad student. One of the first brain surgeons came to visit us one time, and I was a research assistant, and so I got a chance to talk with him. Dr. Prebram, I think was his name, and I was the only one in the class that asked, "Hey, is there such thing as an existence of a soul?" And the whole class got silent because it was like I was embarrassing our professors by asking that, and it was like, "Who's this guy? Who let this guy in here?
Right.
What is he, a pastor?"
Yeah, right.
So, but his answer, is probably something many people have heard by now. But for me, as a young college student, I had never. He said, "Yeah, I do think there's something you can't sense with the five senses that exists, that is in relation to each human being." And I was blown away. The whole class was blown away. I think they were still mad at me, but because it maybe more so because that isn't science, and so. But that gave me, and part of what that made me think of is it gave me hope as a person. And it sounds like you mentioned the spirituality being, or maybe that acknowledgement being part of a deep human need that we have and that we may be ignoring. But I also think the result of that may be feeling very hopeless and looking searching even more for a distraction, for pleasure, and just any kind of something to change how I'm feeling.
Yeah, I think that a big problem now is that we don't have a good shared language to describe this phenomenon that we're talking about. If we use the traditional language of religion and sort of faith-based traditions, that puts off a whole segment of society who consider themselves atheist or agnostic or what have you.
Sure.
And yet, all humans will have these transcendent, expansive experiences that are deeply important to them and become pivotal moments in their lives. And it would be great if we could work towards some kind of shared language where we could be all talking about those important moments, what they mean for us. without necessarily alienating one group or another. So, for example, you used the word soul. Like soul is very specific, very deeply embedded, in mainly the Christian tradition. And so then you're going to have a whole bunch of people who like hair sets on fire because I'm an atheist. And yet, if you will talk to an atheist, that feeling that they get of awe and maybe terror mixed with wonder looking into the night sky. I mean, those are universal experiences. And specifically in mental health, we are trained to largely ignore those experiences. I'll never forget. Recently, I had a colleague talk to me about a patient of hers. She's not a psychiatrist. She's an internal medicine doctor, but a patient of hers. She's Jewish, and her patient's Jewish. And her patient said to her, "Well, how about my faith? Do you think that could be helpful in my dealing with this diagnosis?" And instead of saying to her patient, her instinctive response was like, "Yes, that's a great idea, and I'll pray with you," or whatever. She said I was like frozen because I'd been taught to not bring religion in, and not bring faith in. And so this is, and of course in academia, it's complete taboo.
It is.
Right, as you experience. So I think part of the problem is we don't have a good shared language. Part of it is this kind of negative reaction for people who like maybe grew up in a religious tradition that was sort of rammed down their throats. So there are a lot of negative
bad experience.
So it's just like, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You want to make sure, even in mental health, there are moments to talk and think about spirituality, and certainly in recovery from addiction, it's very well known.
Seems to be one of the central themes from what I can understand.
It can be for many people, especially. Yeah, especially people involved in 12-step
recovery.
That the whole idea behind it is this kind of spiritual awakening or transformation.
Higher power.
Right. So, I'm an advocate for bringing it back into open discussion in academia, in medicine. I know that in my own practice, I talk about spirituality with people. I try to do it in a respectful way that doesn't assume anything, any particular faith. But I mean, it's like we're wired for it. So, in letting that part of our brains atrophy or not using it, we're really depriving ourselves of a potential really helpful orientation on life.
Wonderfully said, and thank you for recreating that whole scene. I'm sure there are several people who turned off their the podcast immediately when they said, "This guy, he believes in God," or he said, "What did he say, soul?" And I think Dr. Pribram immediately corrected me and said, "Well, I believe in a mind."
Right.
And I think he called it, which was fine with me. That I actually didn't even know how to ask the question.
Right.
So I was,
he understood what you were getting at, which is great.
Well, yes, and it was amazing. So lastly, and this isn't necessarily a formulaic podcast, but there are two things that we always want to ask towards the end, and that is what and who helps. So what helps, and so obviously there's a number of different things, and I don't usually put words in people's mouths here, but as a super fan, I'm going to say this might be a great time to talk about. I'm going to tell you about your own work. This might be a great time to bring up the acronym, the dopamine acronym, or something else that you said recently, and or the third option, which is whatever you want. But something else you said recently, which is, there are some basic sort of common sense things that if a lot of people did them, they could probably feel a lot better really quickly. So as far as what helps, those might be something, but what helps? Like what can people take from this time that we had today, and go do, and maybe it's, taking my experience with food and then putting a different stimulus in there and trying something, but what helps?
I mean, just on a very practical level, I invite your listeners to engage in an experiment where they would identify what is that substance or behavior that once they start using it, they have difficulty stopping and they regret the use and they'd like to stop or cut back. And to actually try to go 30 days without using that substance or behavior, knowing that in the first 2 weeks they will feel worse before they feel better. The universal symptoms of withdrawal from every addictive substance are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, depression, and craving.
You're really selling this.
But it's time limited. It's time limited.
Yeah.
If they can just get through the first 10 to 14 days, by weeks 3 and 4, they'll feel a lot better. Not just better than they felt in the first 2 weeks, but actually potentially better than they felt in a really long time. And then I encourage them to make a pros and cons list about what was good about not using and what was bad, right? What's often bad is I was bored, didn't have anything to do. I couldn't hang out with my friends because they all use. But make that list, because the pros are often, it's a long list. And then to sort of decide if they're going to go back to using that substance or behavior. Most people want to use differently. They want to use less. Think about what self-binding strategies, that is both literal and metacognitive barriers, they can put in place to try to help them moderate their consumption going forward. That's the way to maintain the gains from the dopamine fast. So abstain, maintain, and then finally seek out pain. You remember that pleasure-pain balance? When we press on the pleasure side, the gremlins go on the pain side. But it turns out that if we intentionally press on the pain side in mild to moderate doses, we can get our dopamine indirectly by paying for it up front. The gremlins go on the pleasure side. And that's a really nice way to get your dopamine through.
It's a healthy example of pain.
Exercise.
Because I don't want people thinking, if they're struggling already with something like self-injurious behavior, something like that, I don't want
No, so it's got to be right-sized pain, not too much, not too little.
Talk about cold plunge.
Cold plunge. For some people, intermittent fasting, as long as you don't have an eating disorder.
Working out.
Exercise, as long as it's not too much. But also things like prayer, meditation, reading a difficult text, writing a letter, saying you're sorry, telling someone the truth.
Oh, wow.
Gardening unplugged, walking outside unplugged. Why unplugged? Because we're all overstimulated. So just sitting in the quiet can actually be painful for us now. And just try to do that as a way to kind of reset reward pathways and get dopamine and feel good, not from the activity when you're in it, but when the activity is over.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I think we're just going to take that last 5 minutes and that'll be the whole thing.
There you go.
That'll be
abstain, maintain, and seek out pain, but not too much.
Yeah. Perfect. Not too much. This is the question I mentioned before, and it's sort of as personal as you want it to be. But, I think a lot of people listening are hearing and seeing you where you're at now in your career as an author, as someone who's helped lots and lots of people and somehow seems to have like a really cool family life. And, and we've seen, you've even done a few things that have been helpful, like, in the documentary Social Dilemma, you had some of your family in there. And, I think people really look at you and say that's someone who helps other people. But before now, if you were to take a second and think about a person in your own life that if you didn't have that person in your life, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's a person who showed you what not to be, if you didn't have this person in your own life to help you, you might not be able to be here and having done everything that you've done to help others. Are you open and willing to share who that person is for you?
Sure. It's definitely my husband.
Okay.
Yeah, that's easy.
Okay.
He's a great guy. He's like preternaturally happy, which I'm not. And he's also basically really a kind person, which I'm not that kind. Like, you say all these nice things, but basically I'm pretty selfish and I have to work against my own narcissism. And he's not really like that. He's just sort of naturally selfless and kind, and a great dad and a great husband. So I'm so grateful for him.
So the theme today, if I can say this, has been balance, and how that could be helpful. One of the themes today, I think, has been balance. And you're saying with your husband,
he balances me out.
He balances you out.
Because he's a lot nicer. I'm actually mean.
I am.
I'm kind of mean, but I mean, I'm working on it.
Yeah. I think most people are probably kind of mean, but will never admit it. And so it's like this constant gaslighting. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. And therefore I won't take anything personally that happens from this point
there
forward.
You go. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I've already mentioned I'm sensitive. I don't look it. If I would have kept my hair, people would have been like, "Oh, this guy is just a sweetheart." But now everyone thinks
my husband's bald too.
Okay.
Doesn't detract. No worries.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Anna Lembke, whatever you're saying, you've said some things today that that are, I think, profound for a lot of people who are going to be hearing them for the first time. I think that I'm hoping that they do. Reading your book is not one of those painful experiences. I've read difficult texts, and not to say there's not a lot of science, and that it is something that keeps you interested. There's the vulnerability in it. There's a humility to it. As I mentioned before, you kind of mentioning some of your own struggles, and which I think, lastly, I'm trying to tag one thing on there: the role of humility in healing. Does humility play a role in healing?
Oh, for sure. It's big. I think as caretakers too, as mental health care providers, I'm very humbled by the process, which is partially mysterious.
Yeah.
What does active listening and just being witness to somebody else's suffering actually do? But it does seem to help. So just being humble around like the not knowing exactly what we're doing when we're showing up in that way. But it is a powerful aid, I think.
Okay. Anna Lembke, one of the nicest, smartest people I know, self-proclaimed not nice, but it really, truly has been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks, me too.
I hope we get to do something like this again in not too distant future.
Great.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Where can listeners stay in touch with your work?
Nowhere.
Whether it be
nowhere.
I've heard this before. I didn't even ask.
Yes. So I'm not on social media because I wouldn't be able to moderate it. So I abstain.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
And you've heard it here first.
Yeah,
Dr.
Right.
Anna Lembke.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Struggles with
periodically check Amazon or Barnes
Dr.
and Noble.
Pimple Popper can't watch those either.
My gosh.
No, can't go there.
I get chills anytime someone.
My wife handed me her phone to look something up, and I went on YouTube, and I was like, "What is this?" I thought it was some kind of carnage, and she's like, "Oh, I was watching Dr. Pimple Popper again." So hopefully,
I know. I feel like I'm a free advertisement for Dr. Pimple because it's like, no, I should stop saying that. Anyway, we're done. People.
Stop rolling.
It's over.
Stop rolling. Yeah. Keep it here all day.
Oh gosh.
Excellent.
So fun.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope it helped. Stay connected with us at thishelpspodcast.com.
Hey, on World Mental Health Day, October 10th, why not spend it with the world's leaders in mental wellness and find out why Healthline.com called the Wellness Together Conference one of the must-attend mental health conferences in the world. You got plans? Because I want to invite you to the 8th annual Wellness Together Conference. There's going to be over 2,000 other leaders in mental health, education, technology, healthcare, philanthropy, entertainment, and so much more. Happens October 9th through 11th at the Anaheim Convention Center in the beautiful Southern California. There's going to be groundbreaking workshops, many opportunities to connect with other like-minded leaders, and we're gathering leaders from around the world, those passionate individuals that are dedicated to increasing mental health awareness, mental health advocacy, and mental health access for everyone. You can learn more and you can register right now at wellnesstogether.org/conference. That's wellnesstogether.org/conference. And we have a special gift for our This Helps listeners. That's you, if you're watching or if you're listening to this. Receive a 10% off promo code by just entering This Helps, all lowercase. This helps to receive 10% off your registration. In-person and virtual tickets are available right now. And hey, maybe you're interested in just relaxing for the weekend. Just go into a couple of sessions. That's fine. Be our guest, because right across the street, I think there's an amusement park that they refer to as the second happiest place on earth, right underneath the Wellness Together Conference. You may also get a chance to meet the host of This Helps, Marlon Morgan. Yes, he is going to be there, an inspiring keynote session every single year. So again, head to wellnesstogether.org/conference, October 9th through 11th, Anaheim Convention Center. Virtual and in-person registration is available now, and use This Helps to receive 10% off registration. And that's just for you, our This Helps listeners. Hope to see you there. Don't forget to enjoy that promo code, 10% off registration. This Helps. Use that right at registration at wellnesstogether.org/conference. anaheim.org/conference. See you there.